or even 750,000 kilometers. It's actually incredible. In my country, this engine is most common in Skoda Octavia, and they are everywhere, literally. In Poland, Passats, Golfs. The question is why Americans see VW as a unreliable brand, but over here people see it as one of the most reliable. I know that they don't have any diesel cars in America, and VW gasoline engines from that era were not as good as some Corolla engines. But my question still stands, and to be honest, old Japanese cars have a bad reputation over here because of rust problems. Okay, so that's interesting. It depends on where you live in the U.S., but if you're in the northern areas, especially in certain states that I feel like are a little aggressive on how they try to prevent ice and snow, like Illinois, where I live, is just super aggressive with the salt, and they use some sort of compound or mixture that just tears up the roads, it tears up the cars. And yeah, I feel like all cars kind of rust equally. So I haven't really seen, unless you take care of a car, you can kind of prevent it. But when it comes to rust, I feel like everything can rust out, and that's not really a brand-specific thing. But when we're talking about reliability, I agree generally with this. Now, remember, I'm someone a little bit different. I like everything. I love some Japanese cars. I love a lot of American cars and trucks. And equally, I really do love a lot of European cars that I wish I could have. I would love to have an old Volkswagen or an old Audi, right? I'm obsessed with them. I have the flag behind me, right? I love Volvos, right? I drove a Skoda on this channel. I was very lucky to, and I absolutely loved it. It would be so cool to have one of those. Unfortunately, that is just such a rare thing here, and I do think it is kind of odd. I think from the outside looking in, the European kind of the average take on how to maintain your car, combined with availability of parts and the fact that the perception of brands is different. If you're in any European country, I feel like Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagens and Volvos are not rare. They're very common cars. I feel like parts are everywhere. Parts are probably pretty affordable. And I also feel like, every mechanic ever can work on them because that's like the domestic region car. At the end of the day, a lot of countries will kind of gravitate domestically, right? So, of course, American cars are more common here in the U.S. and Canada than they are maybe in Germany. It makes sense. Just like German cars are more popular in Germany than they are here, because Mercedes-Benz is seen as a normal brand there, whereas here it's seen as only a kind of untouchable measure of wealth, where it's like, yeah, only rich people can have Mercedes, right? I feel like there's a difference. Some good points in the comments are like this. Some things I forget or maybe don't think about as much. A lot of our European cars aren't straight up European because of, weird, we have a weird market over here, and we have, weird import and safety laws and tariffs and all these things. So, for example, our VWs come from Mexico. It is a German company, but the cars come from Mexico, shipped up here. Their quality control is not up to par with the German plants. And I saw something somewhere down here that, yes, like the German plants and surrounding regions are union shops. They're domestic. There's probably more pride involved and higher quality standards. So the cars literally might be built better, probably are built better. A lot of Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen and BMW plants here in the U.S. are either in Mexico or in like the southern states where they're not union. And there just might be more of a glazing over things, and, a lot of quality might be a little bit under what it would be in Europe. And over time, that might prove to make some cars that just aren't as well built, even though it's from a German company or something like that. Combine that with high cost, people, you could see how over time reputations might form. And it is, again, I will always say this, we have a very weird car culture and car market, more specifically here in the U.S., and that's why I find it interesting to look at how things are perceived in different countries, because it is starkly different. Also, I agree with this one. It says, IDK about Europe, but Americans love to skimp on maintenance, i.e. skipping oil changes, brake fluid, trans fluid, etc. We also have a lot of trauma from shady and shitty mechanics who upcharge or make something up that needs to be fixed, especially towards women. Toyotas are proven to keep working with very minimum maintenance, while European cars need to be consistent and timely with their maintenance, at least in my experience. And I will kind of agree with the comment below. I think most Americans are pretty good about like the bare minimum, like oil changes, right? I think a lot of Americans do those and get that done properly and on time. But everything else, I'll be honest, a lot of people I know, and just kind of as a whole, everything else is kind of neglected. So people do their oil changes. Maybe if they're one step above, the bare minimum person, they might, make sure their tires are good and rotate their tires and stuff. That's about it. Things like brakes, things like, differential fluid and transmission fluid, brake fluid, all these different things, and filters and intake filters and all these things. I think a lot of people just skip that stuff. They think, oh, I'll do that later, and they never do it, right? That is a very American thing. They kind of do the bare minimum, and maybe on average, if they have an old Corolla, they can get away with that. It'll run decent while it's getting neglected, and a lot of other cars won't. Whereas if they actually bought a BMW, or even American cars, if they bought an old Chevy, 10-year-old Chevy or whatever, and they really maintain it to the T, I bet it would be a lot more reliable, and the brand would have a better reputation. I think that is the problem here in the U.S. It's almost like, the measure of reliability is what car can we abuse the most, right? And it'll take a lot of cars in modern era, I'd say 90s to present, are probably pretty reliable. You just have to maintain it. If you maintain a car correctly, it will probably be reliable. But unfortunately, I feel like the average American car, no matter what the brand, is a little bit neglected or a lot of bit neglected. And I think people take maintenance more seriously on any car in other countries on different continents. And I think that's where it really comes down to. And some other points, I agree, the average American drives longer distances. So some Americans might commute, 1-2 hours each way to work. That's very normal here. A lot of them might drive all around city or suburb environments where it's stop, go, and they might drive all day to work, and then they drive all weekend shopping and going here and going to visit that, their friend, and going to visit their parents and whatever, right? I feel like cars get used to the bone here, a lot. And then combine that with maybe a little subpar maintenance, these things happen and reputations form. Not to mention things I've alluded to before, domestic brands in Europe. So Škodas, BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, Peugeots, Renaults, right? They're just domestic brands. They're not viewed as some holy grail expensive car. So you get more options and more lower trim levels. Whereas here, I feel like the German cars, you only can get fully loaded ones. It's kind of like the stigma here. And you won't get base model diesel, manual transmission cars that seem like they're pretty reliable because, look at that very simple drivetrain, right? We don't get those here. And then this one sums it up. In America, we drive our cars a ton, maintain them poorly. America is huge. I think Europe's huge too, but we'll go with it. We maintain European cars extra poorly because they're expensive to maintain, and a ton of us stupidly don't take maintenance costs into account when buying a car. Bingo. A lot of people that do end up dabbling into German cars, there's the memes, right? You'll see a lot of people that maybe aren't doing so well with money, but they want to feel good, they want to show off, so they try and barely get high payments and somehow try and afford a Mercedes-Benz or an Audi, and they're in over their head. And of course, they can barely afford to make payments on it, or they're already behind on them, but they sure as hell can't afford to maintain them, right? And then that happens. They start to break down, and then boom, now you have someone that thinks a BMW or a Mercedes is unreliable and way too expensive when they weren't the right customer to begin with. This one's kind of interesting. I want to leave this to you guys. First of all, I don't know why Tesla's pictured. If you read this, it's not relevant. But anyway, it's often said that Japanese cars don't do well in European markets. I've heard that as well because they prefer refined, higher quality cars. But then how come most cars sold in Europe are efficient economy cars? Well, first of all, I think everyone... not everyone. I think people generally agree that most Japanese cars are pretty reliable. I mean, not all of them, but, most are pretty well built and reliable. But again, in Europe, from what I've seen, people do tend to gravitate towards their domestic brands, right? I think there's no question that you would see, insert any European country, you're going to see more BMWs or more Mercedes-Benz vehicles than you would see Chevys or Dodges or Chryslers, right? Just like you might see more BMWs, more Mercedes-Benz vehicles than Toyotas or Hondas or Nissans. I don't think it's that every European thinks Toyotas are junk. I think it's that again, it's just more normal and maybe